Welcome to this edition of I'm Not Crazy, but I'm Dr. Rhonda Mattox, the host today, and we are excited to bring you an amazing all-star cast who will be talking about anxiety. We've heard it said many times, don't worry, be happy, or you're so OCD, or I am anal or those types of things. But what does it really mean to be anxious? You are going to find out today, and you'll discover how to figure out if you, in fact, have anxiety and what are some of the best treatment strategies. Now, we are going to put this in layman's terms so that you can understand what we're talking about. As we are introducing our all star cast, please do what you know to do, and that is rep your city. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you already know that you have some questions, go ahead and drop that in there as well. Family, today we have with us the amazing and dynamic Miss Christina Allen, who is a therapist and CEO of Passion Unlimited LLC. We also have the amazing Joyce, who is on blackdoctor.org all the time, talking to us about mental health. And finally, family, we have the Dr. Andrea Reed, psychiatrist extraordinaire who is in private practice and who is helping the community to understand mental health and particularly anxiety all the more. I want you to know that we will be talking about a wide range because anxiety means different things to different people. It's a small word, but it means a whole lot of different things to folks. And so if you have ever struggled to put into words what is happening in your body, today is the show for you. Join me in welcoming to our virtual lectern these amazing ladies and gentlemen. Ellis Dean, my amazing producer and former counselor, adolescent counselor, who will be offering us the male's perspective as well. How are you all doing today?
Doing well.
Oh, doing great.
Doing well. Thank you for asking.
Yes. Well, I always like to get started with making sure we're all on the same page. As we were talking about some of the sayings, don't worry, be happy, I'm so OCD, and some of the things that make us think about anxiety. But let's talk about what anxiety is. And Dr. Reed and Ellis, since you and different ones, since you are the professionals, we'll have you jump in and just give us the definition of what anxiety is because it means different things to different people.
Yes, so anxiety can be a host of different things. A lot of times when we're thinking about anxiety in general, we're thinking about generalized anxiety, and that at times can be feeling irritable, feeling on edge, being worried, not being able to sleep. Whereas other times it can show up as, hair pulling. Some I know in my family and back home in Malvern, people will say, I have bad nerves, and they'll be picking at their eyelashes or their eyebrows. And so a lot of times it can be a lot of different things, but most of the time it is a lot of worry and feeling on edge.
Yeah, I like how you put that because when I was thinking about anxiety, I will tell you that it didn't occur to me, the pulling your hair out, that saying, or pulling your eyebrows
Mhm.
out, that didn't occur to me. So that's a really nice way of putting it. I know as a psychiatrist, when people come in and tell me they have anxiety, I used to think that meant worrying. But over time, I realized that sometimes when people said that, that meant that their thoughts were going really fast, that they were having
Mhm.
nightmares or flashbacks, that they were worried all the time, or that they were even having panic attacks. And so for me, I started to realize that I had to tease and disentangle what they actually meant. Anyone else want to add anything to that definition? Okay. All right. Now,
I do think you're making a good point, and Dr. Reed did a good job with this in terms of getting people to understand that it's not just constant worrying. Yes, that is a
mhm,
component of anxiety, but it can manifest itself in many different ways. Mood swings, irritability. Um, you could have your appetite could be impacted,
mhm,
sleep can be impacted. So there's a lot of things that are a result of anxiety. We tend to associate those other things with depression, but they
mhm.
also can be associated with the anxiety as well. And so we have to get people to understand that there's a broader spectrum of symptomology that comes with anxiety versus just constant worrying and hand wringing. as people tend to think that happens.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons to talk about this is because many times anxiety presents in childhood, in young adolescence, or even earlier, and you may not pick up on it even as a parent in the house with your child all the time. But when they start to talk about, their stomach hurts or their
Mhm.
head hurts, they don't always have the language to say, "I'm anxious, mom," and so or
Mhm.
dad, and so they will start to kind of somatize or start feeling things in their body. And so if you are hearing about a lot of physical complaints, many times we go right to the doctor looking for that and not realize there can be some some psychiatric component as well. And I bring that up because I have so many very sharp patients who choose to drop out of high school or not go on in college because they were so anxious around others, and it just and being in social settings really was challenging to them. Have you all experienced noticing that as well? And tell me what your experience has been.
I'm like nodding vigorously to all of this because it resonates so deeply for me. So, a part of my story is I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety, I think right before law school or when I was in law school. And on the one hand, I'm like, I don't have time for a mental illness. But on the other hand, it was kind of like a moment
Mhm.
because I knew from childhood that I was strange or struggling or something was off, but I had no language for what I was experiencing every single day. So getting that diagnosis really kind of lifted a weight off of my shoulders. And like you said, it put language to the symptoms. I always describe myself as an angsty teenager, but I was also a very moody and very, very serious child. I never smiled. I was very reserved and withdrawn. And I was just always irritable and, like Dr. Reed said, on edge. I did not know that those were all symptoms of generalized anxiety. So, as we're discussing this, that resonates deeply because I didn't have a language for it as a child and as an adolescent. And I didn't have that language until my early 20s when I was in law school getting diagnosed.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so
Mhm.
often, when we present to our parents, it does not, if you even if you had the language to say what it is, many times parents will interpret that and they'll internalize what's happening with their children as a failure somehow on their part, and they will not want to seek treatment because then they don't realize that there's a hereditary component and as well, or they realize there's a hereditary component and they don't want to acknowledge that, or that they think they're doing something wrong or they're making you like that. And so there's this hesitation about getting treatment because it feels like they failed you somehow. I think someone else was about to say something.
I would add, as she was sharing her story, it was hereditary for me and then hereditary for
Mhm.
my daughter. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe I passed that down. It was just like, oh my God. But, even seeing that in her, it was like, okay, I know that I need to get treatment for her as soon as possible. Like, don't let it become so chronic that it's debilitating. And one of the things for her was, she something would happen and she would throw up. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on with my child?" And it was the anxiety. Or she would say,
Mhm.
"I got the BGs, the bubble guts." And it's like, "Why do you have the BGs?" It was anxiety. And it's like just understanding that when you see that in your child, don't um, prevent them from getting the assistance and the help that they need because those symptoms can become debilitating. And that's not what you want.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
And many times people will not recognize that they have it until they're actually getting treatment for their youth or their children. And then as we are communicating what the symptoms are, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I have that. Oh, I have that too. Oh, I have that too." And in fact, while I'm providing the diagnosis for their child, they are saying, "I think I have it. Oh, I gave it to them." And then there's this guilt. And I
Mhm.
understand that the conversation we're having today is really not to provide a cloak of shame for you, but to liberate you so that you can realize once you have the language to say what is happening.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a level of freedom that you just don't understand. When as Joyce was talking, I was just like, yes, and yes, and yes. It's like her presentation read the the guidebook of what we hear. My question though is, when do you realize when do you recognize this as true anxiety versus the typical, I get anxious because I have to give a presentation, or I get anxious because I'm around new people? What differentiates what is an anxiety disorder that needs to be diagnosed and treated versus what is just regular to life? Because I have so many people say, I just thought everybody felt like that.
Mhm. Yeah. So a lot of times I will say that um, if you notice that it is changing your interactions with other people,
Mhm.
like your relationships have changed in a way where you're very irritable towards your spouse, or you can't stand your kid as soon as they come in the house, that may be something we need to address. Or you find yourself avoiding particular things, avoiding going to the store, like going to Walmart or something, because too many people make you anxious. Or if you find yourself not wanting to go with your family to a certain event because you don't know who will be there, that is when I would say it's time to recognize this as a concern and seek some treatment.
Absolutely. Great point. So, when you start to notice that your behavior or your interactions with others are changing, if it's impacting work or family or education or those kinds of things, that's when you do it. Now, we have been really, really general about the kinds of things, but there are also things like obsessions and compulsions and
Yep.
panic attacks. Can we talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Well, I would say one, loss of enjoyment of activities or a change in those activities. I would say avoidance of certain things, right? And so that's what Dr. Reed is talking about. When we start avoiding certain activities, avoiding certain areas, like there's a social anxiety, right? That you don't like being in public spaces, and so therefore you start staying in, right? And so then that could become problematic too, because we all know that we need some sort of human interaction in some way, and so when we start avoiding things, when it starts having some impairment, and I think that's the fancy, sexy, kind of clinical word for really disruption to our life, but there's some sort of impairment in our ability to uh, hold a job because now we're so worried about germs that we can't go anywhere without that Lysol and the wipes, and we're wiping everything down, and that's the compulsion. And so when you see those OCD, that obsession, the intrusive thoughts that we can't get out of our head about germs, that's obsession, and the compulsion is, well, if I continue to wipe everything down, I can get rid of the germs. And so therefore now that's where you get about the constant checking. I can't leave my house because I keep thinking that the oven is on. So those are the type of things that can really, really happen and become problematic. We talked about it earlier, but there's that picking, right, of the hairs in your eyebrows. You see people without eyebrows. That could be somebody that's, it could be alopecia, but it could also be somebody that has severe anxiety. That is the way that they are trying to assuage some of that anxiety. And so, really, again, anxiety is a big umbrella when we're talking about it, and there are many different ways it can be expressed underneath that umbrella. The line that we have to decide as people that are watching this program, the people that are trying to get y'all to, is what is the line between that general stressor, right? That day-to-day stressor, husband getting on your nerves, kids acting a fool. I got a big presentation tomorrow. Dinner's not cooked, nothing's thought out. Those are type of general things that can get on our nerves, versus things that are going to impair our ability to function in
Mhm.
a general normal way. I have used air quotes on normal. Whatever's normal to you, if you, if you can't, if you can't function in that space, then that might be something where you need to get some professional help.
Great points. Great points. I'll tell you that as as I have navigated, and many professional people will professional or successful people will say that their anxiety has helped them, right?
Mhm.
It's helped them uh, prepare or over prepare, and so a certain amount of anxiety helps you. Think about it like this: if a lion invades your camp, you don't want to be relaxed and calm. You want to get out of there, right? So there's a certain
Mhm.
level of anxiety that can be helpful to you to drive you to do your best or to plan or to prepare. But then there's that anxiety that reaches this tipping point to where it's a hindrance. Now, my question for you is when you are when you when you are around certain people, does the anxiety get even more intense? And is this situational? Or is it kind of like what Joyce talked about? Is it all the time? Figuring out how, when it shows up, when you're triggered, how it is brought on. Is it brought on by coffee or caffeine? Is it brought on by you driving? Can you talk about some of the triggers that can bring that can precipitate it or bring it up?
I love saying that mental health and mental illness looks different on different bodies. I think that's why so many people of color, Black people specifically, are misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed because it just looks different sometimes in our community and how we talk about it. But man, where do I begin with this? So I call myself someone
Mhm.
with lived experience generalized anxiety. Thank God I met a therapist in a community that introduced me to the idea that I don't always have to be anxious, that even though there is no cure for anxiety disorder, there is a way to program those pathways in your brain where you're not thinking or relying on maladaptive thoughts. What do I mean by that? You don't have to think the way you've always thought. If you tend to be worrisome and tend to like go down that spiral, you can actually teach your brain different pathways. So, in learning that, I learned what it could feel like to not have anxiety and claim it as my superpower. I also work in a space where anxiety is looked at as like your superpower and I can pull an all-nighter and
Mhm.
anxiety is mine. But then I introduced myself to the idea of what could my life look like if I could be excellent outside of anxiety? What could it look like if I could get this done in advance and not procrastinate because of anxiety? What could it look like if we dared spin a narrative that says we've let anxiety empower us when really it limited us, and we can do so much more when we're not restricted by the illness? But that aside, in this path of wellness, reconfiguring my thought patterns, telling myself a different narrative, I have had to be hyper aggressive about who's in my circle, how the people in my circle speak, how I speak. I'm gonna tell you right now, I was just speaking to my husband about the teams I'm building at work. And I have to make sure that I'm not working with people who yell. I don't like raised voices. I like low cholesterol. I like keeping things kind of in this in this framework. So I'm very intentional about who I'm around that has really elevated pressed speech, as you doctors would know, like pressured speech. I
Mhm.
can't be around that because I start to adapt and their projections of stress. I'm very
Mhm.
mindful on keeping my phone on do not disturb. Dr. Rhonda, I added you to my do not disturb list because I'm like, I need her, but ordered on the list, my husband, my family, and Dr. Rhonda and Ellis, to be honest, and my pastors. So just being very proactive about your boundaries, being honest about your boundaries, um, scheduling things in advance. I don't experience generalized anxiety. I get stressed about normal things, but learning triggers, I love that you mentioned it. Who's in your circle? How are people speaking? How are you speaking? What are the boundaries that you're setting up in advance so that you can just experience peace, even in the midst of chaos? Create it
Mhm.
for yourself. So that's what I'll
Mhm.
say for now.
Oh, I love it, Joyce. Yes, yes, yes. You have to be intentional
Mhm.
about how you set up your world. Now, I'm really surprised that no one has talked about um, how to treat a little bit, and
Mm,
we'll get there because I'll have people come in and they are on one, on, not 100 but on 1,000, and say to me, I don't want any medicines.
mm,
And they associate treating anxiety with medicines, and they are so surprised when I don't start with medicines. Many times I start with looking at a complete assessment. Do you have a thyroid condition? Do you have a metabolic condition that can mimic anxiety, that can argue? When's the last time you had a cycle? Because perimenopause can show up like panic attacks
mm,
and a whole lot of stuff. Have you, been um, have you recently started steroids or new medicines? Steroids can take you there. Oh my word, they really can. And so think about how many people have lupus or COPD or some of those conditions, and they are scheduled frequently steroids. Steroids can take you to a place where you can't sleep and you have anxiety. So starting with the assessment, you understand, and then moving backward or starting with removing some medicines. There are people who have bipolar disorder who, if I give them an antidepressant, they are going to get so anxious. They are not going to be able to sleep. They're going to get so irritable eventually. And so, really doing a comprehensive assessment of what meds they're on as well that could precipitate that. What are some other things that you all have become aware of that can show up and look like anxiety and be anxiety, but it's really secondary? It's not a primary thing. Did that question make
The
sense?
one thing that oh yes,
Okay.
I always ask people during their initial appointment and then throughout care how much caffeine they're drinking.
mm,
Mm.
What does that look like? How much water are they
mm,
drinking? Because a lot of times I'll have someone that's drinking 6 to 12 cups of coffee, with the last drink of the day being a Diet Dr. Pepper before bed, and then they're on one. They want to act the fool. Okay, let me just be real. They want to act the fool, and so I ask them a lot about their diet because it's so important what we put in our bodies. That includes the medications. That includes food. That includes our drinks. They can all show up in different ways and affect us, our behavior. So I always ask about caffeine. Ask about alcohol
mm,
because some people the alcohol can be a depressant and they have this slump, but then they have what I call anxiety. So when they wake up the next morning, they hungover, they're anxious, they're irritable. So I ask about their substance intake as well.
Oh, that is great. And I have, I'm embarrassed to tell you what I'm about to tell you, but I'm going to share it for the good of the people. My first year of residency, I showed up in the ER on call one night, showed up in the ER thinking I was having a heart attack. And the good doctor asked me about my caffeine intake, about my medications. And one of the things that I had done, blushing now, is I had doubled a medication that was working for me that I hadn't told my doctor about, just doubled it on my own. And then I drank a couple of pots of coffee because a day, because in residency you're going, and you're not sleeping. So I was drinking a couple of pots of coffee a day. But I didn't tell him a couple of pots a day. I dialed it back and said a pot of coffee a day. Because I thought that was like good, right? And so his eyebrow went up and he was like, a pot of coffee a day. And I was thinking, well, maybe I should have said a half a pot. But I never told him that I had doubled my medicine without telling anybody, never told him that I was drinking 2 pots of coffee a day. And so he tried to put me on a medicine. And then he said the ultimate. I mean, he made the ultimate faux pas. He told me I had to quit coffee. And you all know I couldn't have made it through residency without coffee. And so I was just like, this guy is the devil. Like, no, not at all, right? So I had that experience of the medication impacting and the caffeine impacting and drinking coffee all the time, and then having what I thought was a heart attack, literally. You
mm,
know, now why am I embarrassing myself in front of all of you friends, right? It is because I'm telling you that I lied to my doctor. When you go in,
mm,
If you want some help, lie to your mama if you want to, lie to your husband if you want, lie to your teachers, but who you don't want to die, don't want to lie to are your doctors, because we will kill you on accident if you don't tell us what you are really, really doing. You
Mm,
understand what I'm saying?
yeah.
Now, you
That,
all
For
just
sure.
pray for
that's
me.
a powerful, that was a powerful statement. It was so much to unpack there right there. I think we need to have a part two on this program. But I will say this: triggers for a good number. We talked about this on a previous show. For a good number of people, it could be family.
Mm,
Mm,
That could be the trigger, and
mhm.
I'll speak candidly. For me, it is right. Certain
Mhm.
family members, when I can feel the anxiety rising up in me as I'm traveling to go see them,
mm,
Mm,
and that should not be
mhm,
as reached. But the key to that for the audience is you got to recognize what your triggers are,
mhm.
recognize what they are, um, and then you can start working on building solutions to lower that anxiety so you don't are so you're not triggered. But if you don't know what they are, you're just gonna be flying off the handle. Everybody's gonna think you're there's that word. I'm not crazy.
But
But but um, the other thing is when you're talking about how do we deal with it, and I was the first thing that popped in my head was legally, like how do we deal with it? Because there's so many people that use substances that are legal, but they use those substances as supplements for their anxiety, and we understand that that's just masking, as Dr. Reed just talked about, that's just masking it, and so if you have to have that drink every time you go home, if you have to, and then you find yourself having going from one drink to two drinks and
mhm.
2 to 4, or and you cannot feel normal, air quotes again, without those substances, you might have a problem. And so, and the
mhm,
problem can be exacerbated because when you go to see the Dr. Maddox or Dr. Reed, they're going to ask you how much are you drinking, and if you lie, they can accidentally kill you.
Really?
And or
Yes.
and if you tell the truth, then we might have to deal with the drinking first
mm,
before we can deal with the anxiety, or
mhm,
we'll deal with it simultaneously. But after a while, the drinking is now the problem. It can move to the front of the class, or the using of the marijuana, whatever you're using, that could be the number one problem, secondary to the anxiety. So you don't want to compound it, and definitely don't want to lie to your doctor. I don't know about lying to your mom and your husband. That's Dr. Maddox, so I'm gonna let that. I'm gonna, I'm gonna let y'all speak on that, but I will say, don't lie to your doctor.
Yes. Yes. We'll let the Lord deal with you on that. Did anyone else want to add anything?
I wanted to mention trauma because a lot of
Oh,
times people
mhm,
don't realize that these past experiences are affecting them in the present. Maybe
mm,
going around the abuser, they start feeling that
mm,
anxiety,
mm,
just going to their house or being in the dark. I don't like to be in the dark. I put my nightlight on because it causes me anxiety because of what happened to me in the past.
Mhm.
Things like that. I think, again, when he mentioned triggers, trauma, there are a lot of triggers that come with that. And something we didn't talk about was physical pain.
mm,
You might be
mm,
dealing with physical issue. My neck and my back drive me nuts when I'm stressed. So not only, just the even your focus, things like that come with it. You can't focus, you can't think, you go blank, lots of things are symptoms of anxiety. And we need to also recognize some of those triggers with trauma, dealing with trauma as well.
I love it.
And
One
Doc,
of the
can we talk about the impact that social media is having on our anxiety and being Black in America, and all the
Mm,
Karens that we're seeing, and just the political and socio-political climate that we're dealing with right now as Black Americans. So I just think, as a general group of people, our anxiety level is elevated just walking out of our door every day as a Black American. I'm just going to be frank about it. Every time I leave my
Yeah.
house, there's anxiety. I don't. I get triggered when I see a police car, and I'm not even speeding or doing anything that's wrong. But when I see a police car, because of all of the things that we have been piled on us for centuries, and you get an anxious feeling. And so we have to recognize that as Black people, we have to find, and I'm hoping we've got enough time here left to talk about ways to overcome those anxieties. But Yeah, Christina, you're absolutely right. Trauma, pain, all of those things that we don't even associate with anxiety are having an impact on our lives. And just being black in America
Mm,
and social media, seeing everything all the time, is not always a good thing because it is adding to our anxiety. And we have to find a way to step back, relate, and release some of that stuff so we can live, you know, because all that cortisol, we can get real deep when we talk about cortisol being released in your body. We could talk about the
Absolutely.
adrenal glands sitting right on top of your kidneys and destroying your kidneys and all that other stuff. We can get technical about it, but in the reality is this: we got to find a way to mitigate it so we can live healthier.
Absolutely. And we have a civil rights attorney on with us who I will give first dibs at that question because I could see in her eyes that she was.
There's just, I mean, that is huge. What most people don't know, so I've been a civil rights attorney for the past 8 years since I graduated law school. What most people don't know is maybe for the past few years, I don't read the news. I mean,
Mm.
I walk into my office and the news confronts me, but it wasn't until honestly 2 months ago that I started getting news notifications to my phone again after years of just not watching the news, not reading the news. I guess I could afford to do that because I'm going to have to be up to date no matter what when I walk into the office. But in my free time, I'm not watching Law and Order. I'm not watching Suits. I'm not looking at the news. I live the news, right? Those were my boundaries because I understand my triggers. I'm a deep empath. I can watch Property Brothers and start crying. I'm not going to go on the news and know and just reaffirm what I know to be true. And I also know the news can be informative. The news is also set up to be sensationalized in the Western world. So they're only dropping the most sensational, emotional. We're not talking about the groundworks of all these civil rights activists. We're not talking about communities that are marching for peace, that are praying, that are protesting as is their constitutional rights. They're talking about rioters and deaths and Black men dying. I haven't read the news for years. That was my personal boundary. Social media, I had to limit it to 1 to 2 days a week where I can look at it after 5 p.m. and look at it for minutes and then get off. I also had to not read comments because, again, I was that person in law school. My paper was due, but I was writing paper in the comments talking about, you know what I'm talking about, and all these things. So you got to know yourself. You got to be really, really proactive about boundaries. Social media is most literally designed to take your most valuable asset, and that is your time.
mm,
Yes.
And it is most literally designed
Absolutely.
to feed you a narrative that you don't even know you're being fed because it's so comfortable and so easy to fall into. So I encourage us all to be really aggressive with those boundaries. Set up a time every week, or if it has to be every day. I'm going to look at this specifically, then I'm going to hop off. If you want to be up to date on the news, I only look at like what's happening with like the Supreme Court, like really, really limited things. It doesn't make you any less black if you don't know about every little thing. We live what it means to be black in this country. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, but just be really, really intentional and aggressive about your mental health and your peace of mind.
I love that
I'd
perspective.
like to
Go ahead, Dr. Reed.
So I would like to mention in regards to social media, we oftentimes see a lot of negative, but then we also see the other side, which is like everyone's highlight reel. And so
Yeah.
that can also make you quite anxious. And I
Tell the
see it
truth.
a lot in like my younger not my students, my younger patients, especially those like early 20s. They oftentimes will follow a lot of accounts that don't look like them, body types that don't look like them, social
Right.
statuses that don't look like them. And
Yeah.
that can create an environment to quickly develop body dysmorphia,
Yeah.
which is
Hmm.
another type of anxiety disorder where they're constantly picking apart themselves. And this can create some other issues where now we're looking at different types of ways to augment and change our bodies. And so it's a lot of the negative, but some of the what we would proclaim as the positive can also have an anxious perspective for you. Yeah.
yeah.
Great point. Christina Ellis, you want to add anything?
I would
No,
like to add something. because we haven't really talked about treatment, but y'all are talking, about the social media and things like that triggers thoughts. And we've got the thoughts, feelings, behavior. When you think about these thoughts that you have, it causes you to feel a certain way, and then you react or respond a certain way. And I was just thinking about the moms, because I'm one of them, they're scared for my sons and my husband to go out into the community and the police stop them. So it's
Yeah.
like my thoughts about that cause me to feel anxious. And then my behavior might be, y'all can't go. You're not going today. You're gonna stay in the house. Stay with
Mhm.
me. Don't go. It's like you don't want to go to the extremes, but you might see yourself going to those extremes because of the anxiety. You're trying to protect. You don't want these things happening. So I just wanted to bring up, the thoughts, feelings, behavior, because that's something that I would work on with a client as far as cognitive behavioral therapy, that we've got to look at how you're thinking about things, how you're perceiving things, change that, adapt to, the way we need to reprogram, refocus, and then we can work on those behaviors so you don't always respond with an anxious response.
I
Okay,
love
Christina. Okay, okay. That
it.
what she said is what got me out of anxiety and depression. What she said is what I did not even know was possible. I'm going to bring it down because I'm just so excited. This
That's
is like
okay. Keep it
this is
up.
what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. I'm glad that you said that because culturally, what the cultural response to anxiety was, avoid it, don't talk about it, don't name it. My mom, God bless her, she didn't know any better, but she told me to call it stress and don't put it down, don't write it down anywhere, avoid it, avoid it, avoid it. But what really freed me was sitting across from that anxious thought and letting that lie speak so that I can counter it with the truth.
Mm,
So I spent so many years trying to numb it, trying to avoid it, trying to run from it. But it wasn't until I sat and I listened to what it was saying that I was able to learn a different way to approach it. But
mhm,
again, that's the treatment, right? You need to know what is being said. Be honest about what is being said. Like, yeah, I am afraid to leave my house, and then
Mhm.
meet it with the truth that is healing.
Let me just do a quick check in with our listeners. I hope I say this. Look, Miss Jones is feeling us today, and thank you for dropping all that stuff in there. Thank you, Barbara Walker, for coming in and saying hello. Those of you who came in a little bit late today, we're talking around the theme of be don't worry, be happy, and talking real talk about anxiety. If you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and hopefully we will see them. I love so much of what all of you have said as you were talking about naming it and numbing it. One of the things that I went back to is, so frequently I work in juvenile justice, and I have 11 and 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds. And I'll ask them, have you used any marijuana, vaping, those types of things? And they will tell me that they started using marijuana as early as 8 years old, some with their
Mm.
parents. And when they are talking to me about it, I say to them, what does it do for you? And so often they say, it helps me not to think, it helps calm me down. It helps me to sleep. And so our kids, and listen, when I say, where do you get it from? Do you know where they get it from? They get it from their parents. Many times, their cousins, their uncles, they get it from family. I thought I was going to hear about their friends. They get it from their friends sometimes, but they get it from people that they get it from you all as well. So I heard at one time about the kid did not know what they were saying. Said that the dog got into the daddy's marijuana and tore the house up. Oh, I wish you could have seen that parent. Oh my, her face was so red. And I just laughed because baby kids will tell you the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Okay. And so parents understand we want better for our children, but many times our children want to be just like us. And so if you smoking weed in front of your kids, understand you are grooming them to do similar things. And one of the conversations that I will have is, this is a short term fix. Now that marijuana is legalized in some areas, people think that it's completely safe. And I need you to understand chronic use of marijuana actually increases your anxiety long term. Chronic use of marijuana actually increases your suicidal ideation, has been associated with increased suicidal ideations and suicide attempts in many studies. So, and and yes, it can be good for certain things, certain things, but let me just tell you, your mental health is not one of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You also
Absolutely.
forgot to mention that marijuana has also been associated with triggering more severe psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia. As you have a family history of
Hmm.
it, you might not know it. You
Hmm.
start smoking marijuana, and that could tip you into that, kicking it off early. So there are a lot of detrimental aspects of it, but it is what. I live in Atlanta, and it's like I can't go outside the door without smelling
Yeah,
it.
smelling it.
Hmm.
And I really don't know what they smoking nowadays because it is so foul. I'm like, you can't even pretend no more. Like,
Oh, look, that perfume is not hiding anything,
it's
No.
making it worse because you got BO perfume and
Oh my
okay?
marijuana.
Yeah,
goodness.
you are
And I,
absolutely. And the marijuana of today is not like the marijuana of the
mm-mm.
70s and 80s where people were like laid back, calm, didn't want no problems or whatever. They have these different variants these
Yeah,
days. And so there's some variants that will get you anxious and uptight, and there are other variants that have you down. And so they have much more THC that's more potent in it, and it's actually contributing to more associated with more psychosis. And I'm careful in my associated versus
yeah,
cause.
associated. I think that
But
the other thing is that it's coming in gummy form now, and it's coming in chocolate, and it's coming in different forms now to where children might not know because it looks like a candy bar, right? It
hmm
looks like
Hmm.
it looks like a gummy bear.
hmm
And if they ingest that and not know the potency of it, you could have a serious kind of physical response, emergent response, because of what's going on. And so that's the seriousness of it. Now, I think, to Ms. Allen's point, I do think we need to give people some. I've been trying to put some tips on the screen for people to hold in terms of, but let's kind of shift in the time we have left. I'm sorry, I'm stepping all
hmm
on your host until
Oh,
something.
no, no, that's all right. That's where we're going. Yes, 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 yes.
I can't turn it off. I can't turn it off. But
Can
yeah,
I
so
pivot for a moment? Can I
sure.
pivot? So I'm just thinking about in our community how we just say pray about it when it
Mm,
comes to mental illness.
Mm.
And I just wanted to add that it's okay to pray about it, but it does say that faith without works is dead. So while
yeah.
you praying, you need to get to work and start working to improve and get your symptoms under control. So
Yeah.
if that means going to the doctor, go to the doctor. If that means going to the therapist, go to the therapist. You can have God and a therapist too. You can have God and a doctor too. And ain't nothing wrong with it. Go ahead, pray about it. That's fine. But you need to put in some work. You got to take action. And so I just wanted to add that because I know in our community, you just pray about it. Take it to the Lord. That's all right. Take it. But go on and get you a therapist and a doctor. And that way everybody can work together, the Lord, the therapist, and the doctor, and you'll be okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
Like what she's saying is exactly scriptural. I'm trying not to preach on this, but look at like if you look at scripture, if you are a Christian, every time someone went to God to pray, that came with an instruction. An
Yes.
Mm,
instruction to
To
do.
do something.
To
do
do.
something.
This isn't like
Mhm.
mumbo jumbo, it is in that Bible. And there's
Mhm.
something that I want to go to. I really, really, really want to uplift what Christina said at the beginning of this and to eradicate shame. But we're talking about legacy, kids watching what our parents are doing, but also, oh my goodness, did I pass something on? So you can't heal in shame. We know that, right? And also, man, how powerful is it that she can look at her daughter and be who she needed when she was her daughter's age?
Mhm.
God doesn't waste our pain. If you believe in God, nothing is wasted.
Mm,
I was looking at my younger brother and he was moody and he was angry and he was throwing things. I remember looking at him and being like, how are you feeling? Because I recognized that angst in him that I had in myself. And all of a sudden, everything that I had went through with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, it all made sense because, man, I needed someone to pull me aside and be like, okay, but I know you feel angry, but what are you really feeling? What's underlying that? And I will never forget my brother just melting in my arms because he didn't know that there was another feeling besides anger. Anger was a secondary thing, it was
Mhm.
secondary to the anxiety. And now he and I can process together because of what I've been through. So instead of this narrative of like, shame, which is so normal that I messed up my child, I may have passed something on hereditarily. What a great blessing that you have been gifted as that child's mother or father, their caregiver, and you can recognize in them what people couldn't recognize in you, and you can help
Mm.
navigate them towards healing. What a great blessing. Let that be the narrative. Let's get out from shame.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
as Christina and Joyce were talking, the thought that came to my mind is in the multitude of counselors there's safety. So many
Hmm.
times we think you have to choose either or, and it can be both and.
Yeah.
For many of the people that I work with, one of the things that I will share with them is pray about who you should see,
Mm.
what therapist you should see, pray about what psychiatrist you should see. Do that as you take your medicines. Pray that you will not have side effects. No poison will harm you or what have you. Also, use the principle of releasing and letting go and forgiveness as a part of it. And I don't start with forgiveness. Let me be clear, but but that can be very helpful and liberating to you because many times we are bitter and it's bleeding into our current lives and keeping us from going forward. And so, um, using some of the principles of your faith, but realizing that does not have to be the only part, that you don't have to use that exclusively. Every good and perfect gift comes from above. And so making sure that you're asking for and seeking after and asking for referrals or recommendations for people who have been respectful to other people's faith, you know? Does
Mm.
that make sense?
Yeah.
No, I think one thing I did, I used to work with some boys when I was in the school system, and we took them on a trip here in Atlanta. We walked up Stone Mountain, and it's a nice little jaunt up to the top of Stone Mountain. And then on the way, at the top of the mountain, we had a bucket. We had them write down things that they wanted to let go. We put all those things in the bucket, and we lit it on fire. And so we let it go. So that was a symbolic, and so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about prayer. Prayer is a symbolic letting go of it. But the work was walking up that hill. The work
Mhm.
was the processes that we had to put in place when we met with them on how to let those things go. So we can have the symbolic thing of letting it, going to the altar and leaving it on the altar. All of us have been to church, know they say you leave it at the altar. You can leave it, that's the symbolic, but the work has to go as
Absolutely.
part of you leaving it on the altar.
Yeah.
I love it.
And
And let's talk. I have many people say, I don't want medicine. And so many of the anxiety conditions are actually the best evidence is for cognitive behavioral therapy. And so let's talk about what that is, cognitive behavioral therapy.
I brought that to the table when I was talking about the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So when you have these thoughts, and we call them maladaptive thoughts, and that's something Joyce was talking about, we have to reprogram literally our thoughts so that our behaviors can be different. If you keep thinking the same thoughts, you're going to behave the same way. So until we can reprogram those thoughts, so that you can feel good about the decisions that you're making, and then you can make those decisions and those choices and those behaviors that match. I think that is powerful. So
Mhm.
CBT is definitely helpful along with the med management. I think the two of those kind of can go hand in hand. You might be able to just do the CBT without the meds, and that's okay too. But I think it's really important that you recognize it's a lot of it is your thoughts, the way you're thinking about things.
Mhm. And and
Mhm.
also when you're going in, do insist on getting, if you're having panic attacks, insist on getting cardiac workup because heart attacks present differently, particularly in women. And it's one of the at one it may still be the number one leading cause of death in Black women of a certain
It
age.
is.
So do
It is.
not do not be pushed off and dismissed as it relates to you have generalized anxiety disorder or panic. Make sure that you get a comprehensive medical workup because uh, a lot of stuff can look like anxiety that is thyroid condition, that's diabetes, that's a side effect of a medicine that you're taking for some inflammatory process. So be very proactive about that, about getting the medical side worked up. And you may want to get a second opinion as well. Many times we don't like. I didn't like the doctor telling me I need to cut out coffee, and I need to get on a medicine. I cut back. Now I only drink 1 cup a day, but it took some time. It
Yeah.
So what about the medications that are used? Like there's a class of medications. The fancy term is anxiolytics, right?
Mhm.
But that's like the abuse of those medications, like Xanax, for example, by people that don't really have anxiety but are using it anyway because they like the effect of it. Um, how do we get people beyond that if they do need some medication?
Mhm.
So I love to use an analogy with a stove because everybody can think about cooking and boiling a pot of water. So anxiolytics or benzodiazepines or barbiturates, those are going to be the things. They're going to be the equivalent of putting a lid on the pot. It will help, but that boiling pot of water is still gonna be there whenever you take the lid off. So once the benzo is worn off, so Xanax is gonna last you a few hours. It's a very quick onset. It's gonna help, but then once it's over, that anxiety is still there, baby. You still gonna be feeling the way you were feeling, and because that fire is up high.
Mhm.
Now, if we think about other medications that are, and I also want to say that benzos and barbiturates are controlled medications. And so, like Ellis mentioned, those medications can be detrimental in the regards of abuse, dependence, and sometimes even death if taken in a large quantity. Now, if we think about the other category that we frequently use, a lot of times we call them antidepressants, but most antidepressants can also help with anxiety. There's one class that we will frequently reference, and that is an SSRI. So if you
Mhm.
think about things like Prozac, Lexapro, Zoloft, Alexa, those are usually going to be, if we're thinking about medications, those are usually going to be the psychiatrist or the primary care doctor's first type of medicine to try because those medicines are going to actually turn down the fire on that boiling pot of water. And so once that, if you have that fire going off, I mean, once the fire is gone, the pot of water is not boiling anymore. You're not as anxious. And honestly, it's very hard to do abuse antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications in that class. You can try. I don't think it's a good idea because you're just gonna end up in the ER looking stupid. But you can try. But I would say your SSRIs, and then there's another category called SNRIs. So if you heard of Effexor or Cymbalta, those also are very good medications to take as a maintenance medicine, especially while you're in CBT with someone like Christina, or if you're going to yoga. I'm always going to be a huge champion for moving your body. I like to think about anxiety as being, if you've gone to physics and all this stuff in high school and college, anxiety is going to be that potential energy inside. It's the one
Mm.
that's always inside and it's moving. And movement like yoga, running, walking outside, that is going to be your kinetic energy. And that's going to actually get it out of your body. So whenever you're feeling anxious, I always tell people go for a walk. It's okay. And if you need to walk inside the building because it's too hot outside, that's okay as well.
Yes, and we can't leave out food.
Mm.
So
Mm.
much of how
Mm.
we feel in terms of our ability to concentrate and our mood and our anxiety can be tied back to our nutrition. high carbs, those and carbs are not all bad. There's simple carbs, they're complex carbs. But if you are doing your pastas and stuff like that, that is not the best use of your nutrition to help you feel better. Foods like fish and salmon, nuts, magnesium rich foods like green leafy foods, those types of things can really be helpful. And I tell people, if you help me with your nutrition and your exercise, you help me not need to prescribe as much. Now, to Ellis's question,
Mhm.
I will say I rarely prescribe medicines like Xanax because they work quickly and they go away quickly and they have a lot more abuse potential. I will, sometimes do clonazepam, very rarely, because I really want to understand what your triggers are and go after your triggers and not treat the fruit of the problem, but get to the root of the problem. So at the conclusion of this,
Mhm.
what I want you to understand is this is about getting to the root of the problem, understanding, is this a medical condition? Is this the fact that you've been exposed to all kinds of adverse childhood experiences and now the chickens have come home to roost, as Malcolm X might say? Or what is going on? Now, family, we are down to our last 3 minutes. Let me give you an opportunity to say your final, provide a resource or a final nugget that people can use. And if you'd like to drop your how people can contact you in the chat afterwards, please do, or share it now. And I'll start with you, Dr. Reed.
Alrighty. So, with as a person who has anxiety and treats anxiety, if you are noticing that it is causing you changes in your life that you don't like, please seek help. The first place that I tell people to go to is the primary care doctor. They are going to be a very good go-to. And if you want to go another step, psychologytoday.com is a great place to find a therapist or a psychiatrist.
Great points.
Oh, and if
Thank
you
you.
want to find me, you can just Google Reading Henderson Wellness. That might be your fastest way versus me telling you a website or something. So just Google Reading Henderson Wellness.
Great.
Mhm.
I just want
Christine.
to add, and I brought up the Lord. I want to add scripturally, God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. And I think that sound mind is what we're talking about today. When you're dealing with that anxiety, you need a sound mind. And that's what we're here to help you with. That's what therapists, the psychiatrists, we're here to help you have that sound mind. And I just wanted to add that part. And if you are looking for me, look up Passion Unlimited Counseling. Don't look up Passion Unlimited. You might find something else. It's the counseling part. Passion Unlimited Counseling. Okay.
Great points. Thank you. Joyce.
I'm just so happy to be here. That sound mind, peace of mind, and mental wellness is your birthright. It's your design. And if you're not experiencing the promise, do what it takes to get to the promise. What I tell people is you don't have to be who you've always been. I was the depressed, anxious, moody, sad girl, and now I can't go a few sentences without joking. You do not have to be who you've always been. You do not have to be sentenced to a lifetime of anxiety. Seek help. God made therapists, He made doctors, He made support systems, and He wants wellness for you. In fact, He promises that for you. Seek help. You deserve wellness, and you are able to transform your thinking, your environment, and your life. You can find me at BDO every other Tuesday. Come thrive with me with Cultivate Your Mental Wealth, where we talk about living in abundance and mental freedom.
Yes, 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 yes. Family, I enjoy Joyce's her show on blackdoctor.org frequently. I'm in her comments, shouting her out and what have you. And finally, Ellis Dean.
Well, I will say this: stop listening to your friends, right? Because your friend. I mean, just let's just keep it 100. Your friends are cool. Your friends are somebody to hang out with, enjoy, to get that nice release. But if you start talking to them and they say, "Oh man, don't even worry about it, man. You good? Uh-uh. If it's bothering you, a therapist, talk to a professional. that's going to help you work through it. And then if they say you're good, then you can say I might be good. But your friends, your family, mm-mm, mm-mm. Please stop listening to them. And I know they love you and they know what's best for you, but they're not trained and they're not professionals, right? You need to, if you're dealing with something, anxiety, depression, whatever. If you're dealing with it, talk to a professional because we're on a family show, but I would say your friends will F you up.
What he
Okay.
said, what he said. I
So,
will tell you, I heard someone say the number one reason people are broke is from listening to their friends. And what I will tell you is your friends frequently tell you what you want to hear, what they
Yep.
believe you need to hear. But when it is time, we reflect. I think I've read somewhere we reflect the people that the five people that we spend our most time with. What I will tell you is on my fitness journey, I wanted to hang out with people who knew how to cook healthy because I like to eat, but wasn't gonna, or people who were living healthy so that their example could inspire me. Family, we are doing this because anxiety, we're now talking about depression. We're now talking about suicide. But what we are not talking about is anxiety. And in fact, we can't talk about it because we didn't even have the language to talk about it. This is one of those shows that I had some things we were going to talk about in mind, and we didn't talk about any of it. So no, there's going to be a part two and a part three. And I hope Dr. Reed will come back and Joyce will come back and Christina will come back. And I have Ellis on lockdown. So I know he's coming back. We can have this conversation again and spend some more time on treatment as well. If you did not get your questions answered and you know you want to, listen, DM Ellis, DM me, and on our next show, we will answer your questions because there will be a part two to this. I want to thank you all for always, always, always being loyal and tuning in every Thursday from 11 to 12 Central Standard Time, 12 to 1 Eastern Time. And I want to thank these amazing, dynamic panelists for sharing their truths, sharing their stories, sharing their journey so that you can understand that you are not alone. We're all in this together. And if you think there is someone who should have heard this, and you know there is, please share it on your timeline and make it public, and just drop it on there. For those of you who don't think you need mental health and aren't going to see anybody, please, 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 please watch this. You need it, and I'll do the same. I'll see you same time, same place next week. Bye bye.